Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about this article in the National Interest called China Takes Advantage of a New Era of World War. And I've been told this is a really good read. And so we're going to critique it, provide commentary on it. So let's see how China takes advantage of a new era of world war. So international politics is now defined by a world at war. The United States is consumed with the stalemate in Ukraine's resistance to Russian aggression and what promises to be a long war by Israel to eradicate the terror group Hamas and its affiliates. Okay, so from this first two sentences alone, we can get a sense for the political orientation of the authors of this article. The United States is consumed with the stalemate in Ukraine. Well, that alone is ridiculous. There's not a stalemate in Ukraine. Russia is using drones, they're using artillery, they're using aircraft to decimate the Ukrainians until Ukraine collapses. And they completely have the capabilities, they have the equipment, the ammunition to do that. Well, then it goes on to say, resistance to Russian aggression. Well, essentially everyone in the political theorist, political analyst sphere knew that if you kept harassing Russia, if you kept encroaching on Russian sphere of influence, that Russia would eventually retaliate. This was warned about back in the 90s. United States going back on its agreements to not encroach on Eastern Europe, and Russia was obviously going to respond eventually, and they did respond. So calling it Russian aggression, completely ignoring everything that the Western alliance did, is ridiculous. And then here we could see that this is obviously a Zionist outlet because they're calling Hamas a terror group. They are freedom fighters. They are allowed to fight against oppressors under United Nations laws using military force, and that's exactly what they did. There is no available evidence that they specifically targeted and tried to harm civilians. All civilians that we know about that were harmed on October 7th were actually harmed by Israelis or were harmed in a crossfire. And so it's been even more prominent that the Israelis actually harmed their own citizens than Hamas harming Israeli citizens. Okay, so Israel's clearly the bad guy. This is not a matter of dispute. This is Israel admitted. It's not me making stuff up. It's not me inferring things. Israel admitted that they did attack using helicopters, essentially anything that moved, which unfortunately include their own civilians within that area. So let's move on and see what else it says. This Middle East conflict may escalate as Iran, through its proxies, carries out attacks against both the United States and the Jewish state. So they don't even try to pretend that Israel is a state of equality. It is a Jewish state. It's a Jewish supremacist, Zionist state. Everyone else who's not Jewish is a second-class citizen. It's an apartheid state. They understand that and they call it a Jewish state, but for them, that's a good thing. Though China is portraying itself as a fair and just potential broker of peace in the Middle East and Europe, in contrast to America's supposed warmongering, is actually intensifying its own military and political pressure against Taiwan. Japan and the Philippines is also backing the aggressors in Europe and the Middle East. Over the near term, Beijing will be tempted to take even greater military risk unless Washington better prepares for this new era of global conflict. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do during this article, I was told this was going to be an interesting read, and it certainly is an interesting read. I'm going to try to critique the propaganda and help you to understand when people are framing things in such a way that it's not particularly legitimate. Okay. So they're going to have to provide evidence. I want to see receipts of this. They say that China is portraying itself as a fair and just broker of peace in the Middle East, and evidence does support that. They produced a peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia. They're the ones that all the Arabic countries, Muslim countries, are going to in order to broker a peace between Israel and Palestine because no one trusts the United States anymore. And this is completely legitimate. There's a ton of evidence that United States and Europe are warmongering and other countries are not going to them for support and for mediation roles, facilitation of peace anymore. Okay, so I want to see the evidence that they are intensifying their own military and political pressure against Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines. I've not seen that. done pretty much the same when it comes to Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines. And just to reiterate something I've talked about before, if Taiwan wins against mainland China and becomes the one China, then Philippines is going to lose even more territory within its surrounding area, because they have a 11 dash line, whereas China only has like a 10 dash line or a 9 dash line, I believe it is. And so, yeah, China is acting very peacefully with its neighbors. It's not taking aggressive moves, and these countries would benefit from siding with China over siding with the United States. Okay, so they don't talk about what is the aggressors in Europe and the Middle East. They probably mean Russia for Europe, but that's absolutely ridiculous. On top of that, they've taken a very neutral stance, even though they could have come out backing Russia completely. In the Middle East, Israel is clearly the aggressor. They've been killing more Palestinians than Palestinians have been killing Israelis for decades now. Since the Nakba. I mean, it's been going on for literally decades, almost an entire century at this point. And so to call the Palestinians the aggressors when they're being genocided, more children killed on average per day in Gaza than in World War II per 1,000 people or something like that. So over the near term, Beijing will be tempted to take even greater military risks. I don't know what military risks they're taking right now. They're just sitting back and watching America collapse. So what risks are they taking? What military risks are they taking? China is benefiting from global conflict in several ways. It is backing Russia and Iran while scoring international propaganda wins in parts of the world that do not like Western foreign policy. Moreover, Beijing sees a freer hand for its coercion campaigns, as it notes gaping deficits in U.S. weapon production capacity and military posture. Okay. So, yeah, they typically back peace, and yeah, they're winning in international politics. They're getting support. I don't know what they're doing that is particularly hostile. They haven't shown any evidence in this article. What coercion campaign? See, they're using this terminology that makes you think that the Chinese are super nefarious, but they're not actually providing evidence of this. They're just saying coercion campaigns, international propaganda, greater military risk. Like, none of these are true, and they're not providing any evidence of it. China throws Russia a lifeline, this next subtitle says. As Washington struggles with a piecemeal Ukraine strategy, China has ensured Russia can continue fighting for the foreseeable future. Trade between China and Russia has grown 30% this year, and total business in 2023 is expected to break $190 billion, last year's record total. More than a third of all Russian oil exports now go to China, providing the Kremlin with a crucial source of war funding. Okay, so is China just not supposed to trade with a country that it has no problems with, like just because the United States says? That's just ridiculous. It's patently ridiculous. China has also become a major player in Russia's consumer market, with one of every 2 cars sold in Russia today, for example, originating in China. Again, if Europe and the United States pull out of Russia, Russia has to buy cars from somewhere. Is China just supposed to not sell them cars? I mean, it boggles the mind. The propaganda is so bad nowadays, it boggles the mind that people actually believe this garbage. Okay, so let's see. China has also become a major player in consumer market. Oh, we already talked about that. In addition, the PRC is reportedly assisting Iran in its development and provision of drones to Moscow. Xi also feted Putin at his recent Belt and Road Forum, reaffirming his commitment to the No Limits partnership the two countries had signed at the beginning of Russia's war on Ukraine, and stressed the two would work together against the heavy-handed bloc politics that the United States allegedly promotes. See, they have no evidence for the accusations they make against China. And then when China says the United States engages in bloc politics, which they obviously do, given how they treat non-NATO countries and how they use NATO to bully non-NATO countries and how they use various international mechanisms and their alliances to bully countries, saying that the United States is allegedly using bloc politics just goes to show that they are framing this in such a way that is very pro-American, without evidence, and very anti-China, again, without any evidence to support it. They've provided no evidence in either instance so far. Xi emphasized that Russia is a key part of his long-term strategy, stating at the forum that developing China-Russia comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination with everlasting good neighborliness and mutual beneficial cooperation is not an expediency, but a long-term commitment. Beijing views Russia as a kindred spirit in its own national project of undoing the U.S. alliance system and building an alternative world order. A Russian victory in Europe has become a top Chinese priority. Okay, so now they're going to talk about how China backs Iran. Meanwhile, Iran has moved towards a more offensive strategy, strengthening the axis of resistance in Tehran's own expeditionary operations that target U.S. forces and its Israeli allies. With China's help, Iran can fund this destabilizing strategy for some time to come. In the past 2 years, Iran's oil shipments to China returned to pre-sanctions levels, and China's crude oil imports from Iran reached a new high at the end of 2022. Okay, so one interesting thing here is they talk about how hostile Iran is to the United States, but this isn't another evidence-free claim. They just assume that you agree with them, and they're framing it in such a way because they make it seem so self-evident that Iran is the aggressor. Well, you know what? It was the United States under former President Donald Trump that assassinated a leader of Iran who was acting as a diplomat in a third country, Iraq, which is against all international laws and norms. It's just such a violation to do something like that. And so to pretend like Iran is the provocateur when the United States is acting in this way, and they're doing it in such an evidence-free way that they're just acting like it's self-evident is patently ridiculous. It is patently ridiculous. And the only evidence that they ever bring to this article is talking about economic numbers. They don't actually bring any evidence to show that Russia is the actual aggressor, that China is the aggressor, that Iran is the aggressor. They have no evidence. The only evidence they bring is economic. At the same time, China is providing diplomatic and military support to the Islamic Republic with Beijing's assistance. Iran has formally joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the security bloc led by China and Russia. At the same time, China's military ties with the Islamic Republic are also growing. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi hosted Chinese Defense Minister Wei Fenghe in April 2022, and the two countries agreed to collaborate on military strategy. Iran, China, and Russia conducted a 5-day naval drill in the Gulf of Oman earlier this year. Tehran last February. Raisi traveled to Beijing, and the two countries signed 20 agreements worth billions of dollars. Iran can now rely on China as an economic safety valve while also avoiding military and diplomatic isolation, despite being the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. See, I just love this. They just have evidence-free claims over and over and over again. Okay, one, when you're talking about Islamic terrorism, the suicide bombers have, in every major instance that I can think of, were Sunni Muslims. I don't think the average American can tell the difference between a Sunni and Shia Muslim, but they were in every case I can think of Sunni Muslim. And Iran is a Shia Muslim country, and Iran has not sponsored terrorism. They don't do that. Like, they have never done suicide bombings. They don't do anything like that. They do everything above board. And again, this article has an evidence-free claim that Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism. I just want to see receipts. Show me some receipts. In another nod towards Iran and its allies, China has refused to condemn Hamas after its barbaric attack against Israel and instead portrays Israel as the aggressor in the conflict while criticizing the U.S. support for the Jewish state. Okay. Yes. So in order to condemn Hamas, you have to actually show evidence that they did something wrong. Okay. Attacking military targets, which that's the only thing we have evidence for right now, is allowed under international law because they are a controlled country. They are under occupation from Israel, and they are allowed to attack military targets under international law. All evidence, including evidence from Israel about civilian casualties, were done by the Israelis on their own citizens, or it can be at least assumed the rest that weren't killed by the Israeli military were caught in the crossfire. There is no evidence, zero evidence. Every piece of evidence, every accusation that Israel has come up with has been refuted. It's been ridiculously easy to refute, okay? So China cannot be asked to condemn Hamas until you can provide some evidence that they did something wrong. And I am saying this as someone who is not a Hamas supporter. I strongly disagreed with how they conducted themselves in Syria. They opposed the Syrian government, and I think the Syrian government was correct in how it conducted itself. And so they got involved in sectarian conflicts against Shia Muslims that I don't think they should have been involved with. And so I condemn Hamas in that regard. But for me to condemn Hamas in regards to the attacks on Israel, you would have to show some evidence that they did something that violated international law. And so far, there's been zero evidence of that. Okay. So I want to see the receipts. Okay. So portrays Israel as the aggressor in the conflict. Yeah. If you look at the history of it, they are definitively the aggressor. Ask Norman Finkelstein. He does a lot of work on this front, and it's very clear that Israel is the aggressor. Beijing has even allowed, okay, so the article goes on, Beijing has even allowed anti-Semitic tropes to proliferate on the internet, implying Jewish control over American policy and amplifying its overt hostility to a key U.S. ally. Okay, so Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister of Israel, has admitted to control over the United States. He's been caught on camera saying, we completely control the United States, we control their policy. He goes into Congress and tells them what to do, tells them when to stand, when to applaud, how much they should support Israel. I mean, when you have the leader of a foreign country saying, I own your country, maybe you should listen to them. I mean, particularly when all available evidence does support that. I feel like I'm living in a crazy world where a foreign leader can say that, and it's not considered a strong piece of evidence that it actually does control the United States. So Beijing saying the same thing that Benjamin Netanyahu says is not anti-Semitic. Okay, it's not anti-Semitic. I'm sorry. Ridiculous. Okay, so it goes on to say in this article, these Chinese stratagems play well in much of the non-aligned world, which sees the United States as too close to Israel. Yeah, it is. These things are not helping the United States right now. It goes against the security interests of the United States. The United States still does it because it is controlled by Zionist billionaires. Meanwhile, China coerces its neighbors. This article says, meanwhile, as it throws support behind Russia and provides critical support to Iran on the move. Again, what is Iran moving towards? They're doing nothing. They're just minding their own business, trying to circumvent the sanctions that the West has imposed on them. China is itself engaged in 3 simultaneous coercion campaigns against Manila, Tokyo, and Taipei. I would love to see how this article supports that evidence. Its maritime, air, and cyber harassment of Taiwan has escalated to dangerous levels. Again, that's not true. They've tried very hard for a peaceful reunification, and American policy is that there is one China. Okay, so just acting like Taiwan is an independent country is ridiculous. And fomenting independence is against United States' own words, what they say in regards to a one China policy, and things like boots on the ground is clearly a provocative action, which the United States has conducted. They have put boots on the ground in Taiwan. They say it's as trainers, things like that, advisors, but it is boots on the ground within what the United States says is a province of China. It says at the same time, its pressure against China or Japan in East China Sea is ceaseless, with ever larger Chinese vessels contesting China's control over the Senkakus. Most recently, Beijing has raised tension with Manila once again. The Chinese Coast Guard and China's quasi-military maritime militia have blocked and harassed the Philippines Coast Guard and military as they attempt to resupply the BRP Sierra Madrid in the second Thomas Shoal. The shoal is well within Philippines' exclusive economic zone, though China claims it. Okay, so here's another interesting way of phrasing things. These are disputed claims, and these areas of water around countries are disputed by many countries, but they're pretending like this is exclusively controlled by the Philippines and is not a contested area. Okay. And it's not only contested by China, but there are many contesting claims. Thailand, Vietnam, I mean, everyone claims these waters. Taiwan obviously claims these waters. Taiwan claims more of these waters from the Philippines than China does, mainland China. So ridiculous. Beijing is trying to control the entirety of the West Philippine Sea, which is Filipino maritime territory. President Biden has sent an aircraft carrier, the USS Ronald Reagan, to Manila from Japan to put some muscle behind its claims that it will defend the Philippines. But this is in addition to 2 carrier strike groups the United States has deployed to deter Iran and its proxies from escalating the ongoing war on Israel. To defeat these campaigns of coercion and subversion, the U.S. will have to increase both its military presence and diplomatic engagement to build a more robust counter-China coalition. Unfortunately, Washington finds itself unprepared for Chinese coercive tactics, having underfunded its defense for over a decade. Okay, I think this is the last section. An overly cautious Washington is stretched thin. China has, wow, that title, that subtitle here, an overly cautious Washington. I've never heard anyone consider the United States to be overly cautious. It is the most aggressive force the world has ever seen. It's been at war for every year of its existence, aside from like a dozen years. The United States is a ridiculously belligerent country. So calling it overly cautious, that's hilarious. China has room to maneuver as Washington is proving itself overstretched, the consequences of years of underfunding its national security policies. Washington has organized an impressive coalition to arm and assist Ukraine, including over $75 billion in military and other aid to Kyiv. It is likewise providing military assistance to Israel and has sent more forces into the Middle East to deter Iranian aggression throughout the region. Okay, so it is Israel that is bombing hospitals. Iran is just sitting back watching America destroy itself. So just ridiculous claims here. But its Ukraine strategy has been slow and insufficient, allowing Russia to organize hard to break defensive positions in the Ukrainian areas it controls. Moreover, the war has revealed great strains in U.S. defense industrials, bases, production capacity, and ability to assist its allies. If current trends continue, Ukraine could lose the war, which would amount to a serious blow to U.S. grand strategy and the fate of NATO. Yeah, Ukraine is definitely going to lose. China's closest ally will have prevailed even in the face of Washington resistance, an outcome that will raise doubts in Beijing's mind about Washington's will and ability to follow through with its commitments. Japan and other Asian allies who have supported Ukraine will question U.S. geopolitical will. Iran would be tempted to turn the current conflagration in Israel into something far more devastating. Okay, so it goes on to talk about defense production stalling. Yeah, we've talked about this in other articles, but United States and Europe combined can't produce even a quarter of what Russia can produce in terms of equipment and ammunition manufacturing. We could just skip that section. Okay, so wrapping up with the danger of unpreparedness. Will China escalate? Given the failures of Xi's zero COVID pandemic policy and consequent economic difficulties, this would have been precisely the time to apply more pressure on the PRC and push back on its regional coercive strategies. Instead, the Biden administration is seeking a detente with the global troublemaker. Xi received a feel-good bilateral summit with President Biden, which Washington had chased for many months. Beijing insisted on and received a private dinner with the CEOs of America's leading companies. They reportedly gave the Chinese dictator a standing ovation, expressing their eagerness to resume business with the People's Republic of as usual. Okay, so the reason Beijing, at least what I think is the reason Beijing wanted to meet with the CEOs of America's leading companies is because they know that big business controls big government in America. Okay, it's the other way around in China. Big government controls big business. In America, big business controls everything. And so China, when they come to America, they want to meet with the actual people the oligarchs who control and run the United States of America. And so that's what they did. So this article goes on to say this is a major public relations win, boosting Xi's image at home while demonstrating to allies that Washington will put its commercial interests first in ties with the PRC. Okay, so interesting article. I talked about it for like 25 minutes, and it's so obvious that they do not have the evidence for the claims that they make here. So this article is by Dan Blumenthal, and it's so obvious that this is a ridiculous propaganda piece. It frames things in such a way that it makes the extremely passive China and Iran to be the aggressors when it's clearly places like Israel and the United States that are the aggressors. It uses very propagandist language. It makes accusations without any supporting evidence. And it knows in some cases, see, that's the thing, where if the writer of this article, Dan Blumenthal, was too stupid to provide any supporting evidence for any of its claims, I'd be like, okay, they're just a moron. But whenever they talk about economic claims, they provide supporting evidence. And then they make moral claims, they make accusations against places like Iran and China, and then they don't provide supporting evidence. And so that tells you that they know that these claims, these hostile words against places like Iran and China, they know these accusations don't have any substance behind it, which is why they don't try to provide any evidence for those types of claims. So you should be very suspicious of these types of articles between the propagandist language and how they subtly or not so subtly get around providing any type of receipts for what they're saying. So anyways, that's what I'll leave you with. If you found this to be informative, please give us a thumbs up. If you think this is of interest, please share our videos with other people. We want to get our channel out there. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Rumble for more content. We are being suppressed in the algorithm, so anything you can do to get the word out, we would definitely appreciate it here at the Joe Ligato Show. And leave us a comment in the comment section, questions, concerns, critiques. I do read all of them and I respond when necessary. So that's all we have for you today. Thank you for watching and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.